The empty basket. The market was alive with noise, lights, and strange voices. Ships had landed earlier that morning, and traders from across the galaxy had opened their stalls. There were smells of cooked food, bright fabrics from far planets, and shining tools displayed to attract customers. But in the middle of this crowd, one figure did not shine. She walked slowly, head lowered, a thin alien mother with gray skin and tired eyes. In her arms, she held a basket that seemed far too heavy for her weak frame. Inside were only a few simple items: bread, dried fruit, and a small packet of grain. To others it looked like nothing, but to her it was survival. The cashier at the stall noticed her, a young human man with sharp eyes and a strong posture. He had seen her come before, always careful, always counting her credits twice before placing them on the counter. Today she looked different, as if a storm had broken inside her. She placed the basket down gently, as though afraid even the bread might break. Around her, whispers began to rise. "Outsider again," one alien trader muttered. "She doesn't belong here," another said, his voice filled with disgust. The mother kept her head down, clutching her child's blanket close to her chest. The blanket was old and frayed, and inside it the child slept, too weak to open his eyes. The cashier waited, his hands resting calmly on the counter. The mother's trembling fingers pulled out a handful of small metal coins. She placed them carefully one by one on the wooden surface. Her voice shook. "This is all I have." The human looked down at the coins, then at the basket, then at her thin face. The numbers did not match. It was not enough, not even half. The market grew louder as others leaned closer, enjoying the scene. Some laughed quietly, others shook their heads. "She will have to return it," one said. "She should not even try," said another. But the cashier said nothing. The mother's shoulders dropped, her breath catching. She reached for the basket with shaking hands, her voice breaking. "I will return it," she whispered. Her eyes filled with tears she did not want to show. She thought of her child, waiting for food that would not come. Her heart felt heavy, heavier than the basket itself. The cashier did not move. Instead, he placed his hand gently on the basket, stopping her. The crowd went silent for a moment, confused. His voice was firm but not harsh. "No one leaves my counter hungry," he said. The words were simple, but they struck like thunder across the busy market. The mother froze, her eyes wide. She had heard many things about humans: violent, reckless, dangerous, but not this, never this. The traders muttered in shock. "Is he mad?" One said, "He cannot do this." Another hissed. The cashier ignored them, his gaze fixed only on the mother and her child. She tried to speak, to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Her child stirred weakly in the blanket, a small cough escaping his lips. The human's face hardened, his decision clear. "I will cover the cost myself," he said, his voice louder now. Every alien within earshot turned their heads. Some sneered, some shook their heads in disbelief, but none could look away. The mother's knees felt weak. She almost dropped to the ground. Her hands gripped the basket, unsure whether to hold it or push it back. "No, no, you cannot," she whispered. Her people would call it shameful, a debt too great to ever repay. But the human's eyes did not waver. "This is not a debt," he said, calm but strong. "This is what we do." The silence that followed was heavier than the noise of the market. For the first time, the alien mother lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and she saw no mockery, no pity, only something fierce and unshakable: compassion. Around them, the crowd shifted uneasily. Humans were already feared for their strength, their unpredictable ways, but kindness, this kind of kindness, was more dangerous than any weapon. The mother clutched the basket close, tears slipping down her face. The cashier simply nodded, turning to prepare the food as though it was the most normal thing in the world. Yet everyone watching knew it was not normal. It was something else, something that would be remembered. As the mother stood frozen with the basket in her arms, a single thought burned inside her. Today, her child would eat, but the galaxy would never forget what the human had just done. The refusal, The market did not return to normal after the human's words. The crowd stood frozen, waiting for him to take back what he said, but the cashier's expression did not change. He was calm, steady like a soldier holding his ground. The alien mother's lips trembled. Her instincts told her to push the basket back, to refuse this gift. Where she came from, debts were chains, and chains were heavy. She shook her head, whispering, "I cannot accept this." Her voice was weak, but the human did not bend. "You will accept it," he said, his hand resting firmly on the basket. "You and your child will eat." The words were simple, but they cut through her fear. He was not asking. He was refusing her refusal. That was the strange thing about humans. Where others stepped back, they stepped forward. Where others closed doors, they opened them wider. The crowd grew restless. A reptilian trader hissed, his forked tongue flicking. "This is against order. The rules are clear." A tall insectoid creature tapped its mandibles. "If every human acts this way, chaos will spread." But still the cashier did not move. He reached into his own pouch, pulled out credit chips, and placed them on the counter. The payment was more than enough. The food was now hers. No law broken. No excuse left. The mother clutched her blanket tighter, her child stirring again with a faint cough. Her throat burned with shame and relief all at once. She wanted to fall to her knees, but something about the human stare stopped her. He was not saving her out of pity. He was saving her because he believed it was the right thing to do. That belief carried weight heavier than any currency. A murmur spread through the market. "Humans always break the pattern," someone whispered. "They do not care about rules," another said, but under the fear, there was something else too. Curiosity, even respect. For the first time, the aliens looked at the human not with suspicion, but with unease. What kind of people refuse to let others starve, even when it cost them their own wages? The mother whispered again, her voice fragile. "Why would you do this for me?" The cashier's eyes softened for a moment, but his voice stayed steady. "Because hunger is the same in every language," he said. The mother's breath caught, her eyes filling once more. It was the first time in years she had heard words that carried warmth instead of scorn. A sudden sound broke the heavy silence. Metal boots on stone. Patrol officers entered the market, their armor gleaming under the lights. The crowd shifted, back, creating space as the officers marched straight to the stall. The mother's blood turned cold. If they questioned her, if they traced her, her secret would spill. And she could not let that happen. The lead officer stopped before the cashier. His eyes narrow. "There is disturbance here," he said, his voice sharp like a blade. The reptilian trader pointed quickly, his tail flicking with excitement. The human broke protocol. He gave food without proper exchange. The officer looked at the basket, then at the human, his face unreadable. "Is this true?" he asked. The human did not flinch. He lifted the credit chips from the counter and dropped them again, the sound sharp and final. "The cost is covered," he said. "No law broken, no protocol ignored." The officer's jaw tightened, but he could not deny the truth. The payment had been made, fair and complete. The human's defiance was clean, sharp, impossible to cut through. The mother held her child closer, her body trembling. The officer's gaze swept over her, as though searching for a reason to drag her away. But the human shifted, stepping slightly forward, placing himself between her and the armored patrol. It was not loud, it was not violent, but the message was clear. She was under his protection. The officer studied him, then the basket, then the silent crowd. Finally, he gave a short nod. "Very well," he said coldly, but as they turned to leave, his words carried a warning. Humans should be careful. Kindness can be more dangerous than rebellion. The officers marched away, their boots echoing. The crowd began to buzz again, voices rising. Some mocked the human for his foolishness. Others whispered of his courage. The alien mother stood, frozen, unsure if she should run or stay. But the cashier only nodded at her and said quietly, "Take your child home. Feed him. Tomorrow will worry about itself. Her hands trembled as she held the basket close. She wanted to thank him, but no words came, only a quiet nod, her eyes wet with silent gratitude. The human turned back to his work as if nothing unusual had happened. But the market knew it was not nothing. It was the beginning of something larger. In the corner of the market, a shadowy figure slipped away, a messenger who would carry this story far beyond these stalls. By nightfall, every trader in the city would know. By tomorrow, the stars themselves might hear that a human refused to let a stranger starve, and that refusal might change everything. Rumors across the market. By the next morning, the market was louder than ever, but it was not the usual noise of bargaining or shouting traders. It was whispers, traveling fast, bouncing from one stall to another, whispers about a single act that had broken the rhythm of ordinary life. "They say a human gave away food," muttered a spice seller, his 6 arms moving as he arranged jars. "A human refused to let a mother starve," answered a cloth trader, eyes darting left and right. Some voices carried disbelief, others carried awe, and some carried fear. The story had grown in the telling. Some said the cashier had thrown credits at the officers. Others claimed he had threatened them with hidden weapons. And there were even whispers that the mother he helped was no ordinary refugee, that she carried a secret strong enough to make humans defy the law. The cashier himself stood behind his stall as always, silent, his movements steady. He did not join the gossip, did not defend or deny. He worked as if nothing had changed, though everything had. Every glance that landed on him was different now, some filled with suspicion, others with quiet respect. A few even with fear. The alien mother stayed hidden. She kept her child close, afraid to walk the market again. Her heart carried gratitude, but also dread, because she knew that her presence was the spark behind the fire of these rumors, and fires, once lit, were hard to control. In the shadows of the marketplace, groups of aliens gathered. A reptilian merchant spat angrily. "If humans spread this madness, order will collapse." An insectoid warrior clicked its sharp mandibles. "They care nothing for balance. They will turn kindness into a weapon." But others hesitated. A small rodent-like trader whispered, "Yet, what if they are right? What if no one should leave hungry?" The officers who had confronted the cashier were not silent either. Their report traveled quickly through command channels. The words they wrote were careful, yet heavy with warning. "Humans showed dangerous unity," the report said. "They bend rules not with violence but with compassion, which cannot be controlled." By evening, the story had reached taverns, repair docks, and even the cold chambers of the city's council. The name human was once again spoken with unease, not for their weapons, not for their wars, but for their refusal to let a stranger suffer. It unsettled leaders more than fleets ever had. The mother, hiding in a quiet room with her child, heard the muffled voices from the streets outside. She pressed her forehead against the wall, whispering to herself, "They will come for us, they always come." Her child coughed softly, his thin frame shivering under the blanket, her eyes filled with tears. But then she remembered the human cashier's words, "No one leaves hungry." That promise echoed louder than the whispers of fear. Back in the market, traders began testing the rumor in their own ways. A vendor dropped the price of fruit for a struggling family. Another offered extra grain to a poor miner. And when asked why, they answered quietly, "The human did it first." The idea spread not through speeches or threats, but through action, and every act added weight to the rumor until it felt like truth. But not all eyes saw it as hope. In the upper levels of the city, a warlord's messenger leaned against a balcony rail. His eyes narrowed as he listened to the tale of the human cashier. He smiled coldly. "If this is true," he whispered to himself, "then the mother must be found." For him, the act of kindness was not strength. It was a trail, and trails always led to prey. In the market, the human cashier finally closed his stall for the night. He locked the counter, gathered the empty baskets, and walked through the dim streets. But he was not alone. Behind him, footsteps followed, quiet but certain. When he turned, 3 figures stood in the alley, their eyes gleaming in the low light. One spoke, voice low and sharp. "You should not have done that." The cashier's gaze did not waver. "I did what was right," he said. The figures hissed, anger sparking in their eyes. "Kindness makes enemies," one sneered. "Then let them come." The human answered, his voice steady, his shadow stretched long against the wall. And though he was just one man in that moment, he felt larger than the alley, larger than the city. The rumor was no longer rumor, it had become a seed planted deep in soil that stretched across the stars, and soon the galaxy would learn what grew from it, a choice in the spotlight. The next morning the market was not just busy, it was tense. Every stallkeeper's eyes flicked toward the human cashier's stall. Every customer leaned closer to whispers instead of goods. The story of the struggling mother had spread so far that the marketplace now felt more like a stage. And the cashier, without asking, had been placed at its center. He worked as always, steady hands arranging food, careful eyes counting credits. But behind the calm, he felt the weight of every stare. Even the air seemed heavy, as if waiting for something to break. It did not take long for the break to arrive. From the main street came the sound of boots again, metal striking stone sharp and rhythmic. The patrol officers returned, their armor brighter than before, their presence heavier. They did not come quietly this time. They came with banners of authority and eyes set on the human stall. The crowd split like water before a ship. Everyone pulled back, forming a circle that left the cashier exposed under the open sun. Even the traders who once mocked him now stayed silent. They wanted to see what would happen. They wanted to see if humanity's defiance would be crushed or allowed to grow. The lead officer stepped forward, his voice carrying like a blade through the market. "Human cashier," he called. "You stand accused of disrupting order with unlawful generosity." The words echoed strangely, unlawful generosity. The crowd stirred, some shaking their heads, some nodding, but all were waiting. The human lifted his head slowly. His face showed no fear, no panic. He wiped his hands on his apron and stood tall behind the counter. "What law did I break?" he asked calmly. His voice was not loud, but the silence of the market carried it across every ear. The officer's eyes narrowed. "You gave food to one who could not pay," he said. "You upset the balance of trade, you weakened discipline." The human reached under the counter, pulled out his pouch, and dropped credit chips onto the wood. The sharp clink rang out clear. "I paid," he said. The cost was covered, the trade was fair. The crowd murmured louder. He was right. No rule was broken, no code violated. The officer's jaw tightened, but he pressed forward. "It is not only about trade, it is about order," he said. "If one of you humans does this, others will follow and the pattern will break." His gaze swept across the crowd. "It will lead to chaos." The cashier leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady, his words deliberate. "Then maybe the pattern needs to break," he said. The crowd gasped, some in shock, some in awe. Even the officers flinched at the boldness of the words, but the human did not stop. He raised his voice now so all could hear. "Hunger is not order. Starvation is not balance. If your rules demand that a child starves, then your rules are broken already." The silence that followed was electric. No one moved, no one breathed. The officers stared. The crowd held their ground for the first time in years. The marketplace felt alive with something greater than trade. It felt alive with choice. From the corner of the market, the alien mother appeared. She stepped into the open, her child wrapped tightly in her arms. Gasps spread like fire through the crowd. She should have stayed hidden, but she could not. Her child's weak breath, his small cough, they gave her courage. She walked forward, her voice trembling but strong. "He speaks the truth," she cried. "My child lives today because of him, because he refused to let us starve." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some shouted, others fell silent in disbelief. The officers turned to her sharply. One lifted his hand as if to seize her, but the human cashier stepped out from behind his counter, standing between her and their reach. "You will not touch her," he said. "She is under my care now." The officer froze. Not because of fear, but because of the eyes of the crowd. Every trader, every customer, every witness was now watching closely. If he struck, if he forced, it would not just be an arrest. It would be a war of spirit, and he knew it. The officer lowered his hand slowly. His voice was sharp but uncertain. "You risk much, human. You risk more than you understand." The cashier's reply came without hesitation. "No, you risk more by thinking kindness can be silenced." The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. The officers finally stepped back, their retreat quiet but filled with warning. The crowd broke into murmurs again, louder, more daring. They had seen something rare, something dangerous, a choice made in the open, in the spotlight. And it was not the officers who looked powerful. It was the human who had refused to bend. As the mother clutched her child tighter, and the human guided her away from the center, one truth settled deep in the hearts of all who had seen. This was no longer just about food. It was about something far greater. It was about what it meant to be human. The mother's secret. The market never fully calmed after that day. Every corner carried whispers of the human cashier's defiance. Every stall seemed to weigh his words against the rules of the city. And at the center of all this attention was the alien mother. Though she tried to stay hidden, though she wrapped herself and her child in shadows, the story had already given her a face. She stayed in a small, broken shelter at the edge of the district. The walls were thin, the roof leaked, but it was better than the streets. Her child lay curled beneath a blanket, his skin pale, his breath shallow. She sat beside him every night, holding his hand. Every cough shook her heart like a blade. The human cashier visited when he could, carrying food, sometimes medicine. He never asked for thanks, never asked for her name. But he noticed the way her eyes always darted to the door, the way her hands trembled when footsteps passed outside. She was not just poor, she was hunted, and one evening, when the silence grew too heavy, he asked, "Who are you really, and why do they want you?" The mother's body stiffened, her eyes glistening with fear. For a long moment she said nothing. Her lips parted, closed, then parted again. Finally, her voice came, low, broken, yet filled with truth. "I am not just another refugee," she whispered. "I am the last survivor of a colony destroyed by Baron Kraith." The name fell like a hammer in the small room. The cashier's jaw tightened, for he had heard that name before. Baron Kraith. A warlord feared across sectors. A butcher who crushed weaker worlds and sold their people as slaves. His forces left nothing behind but ash, and now one of his victims sat before him, clutching her child. She lowered her gaze, shame burning in her eyes. "My husband was executed before my eyes," she whispered. "They called us traitors for resisting. I was spared only because they thought I was broken, worthless." Her hand gripped, her child's blanket tighter. "I fled with him. I ran through shadows, through camps, through ships that carried me like cargo until I reached this place." Her voice cracked. "But Kraith's hunters are everywhere. They will find me, and when they do, they will take him." The cashier's fists clenched at his sides. The picture was clear now. Her hunger had not just been poverty, it was survival, escape, desperation. And the food he gave was not just kindness. It was rebellion against the cruelty that hunted her. He spoke slowly, his voice steady like stone. "You should have told me sooner." Her eyes widened, filled with panic. "Would you have turned me over?" she asked, trembling. But the human shook his head firmly. "No, I would have prepared sooner." For the first time, the mother stared at him fully. No walls, no lowered head, just her full gaze. And in that moment, she saw something she had never seen in the eyes of another species. Not pity, not fear, but promise. A promise that he would not let her be taken. Outside, the city buzzed with news. The council had met in private chambers. Officers spoke in hushed tones. Already rumors of Baron Kraith's spies moving in the lower district spread like smoke. The officers knew the mother was here, but they could not move openly. Not with humans watching. Not with the market already restless in Taverns, traders argued late into the night. If Kraith's men come, will humans fight them? One asked. They are reckless enough to do it. Another answered. They are foolish, hissed a reptilian merchant. But a small voice at the corner of the room whispered, or maybe they are exactly what the galaxy needs. Back in the shelter, the mother held her sleeping child against her chest. She whispered to him words he was too weak to hear. You will live, my son. You will not grow under Kraith's shadow, because a human has given us hope. Her tears fell onto the child's thin cheeks, and for the first time in years, her tears carried not only sorrow, but a fragile spark of belief. The cashier stood guard at the door, his hand resting near the handle of a hidden blade. His mind replayed the officer's warning. Kindness can be more dangerous than rebellion. And now he understood, because kindness had revealed. A secret kindness had put him on a path that might lead to war. But still he stood there, silent, unshaken, because in his heart, one truth burned brighter than fear. If humanity's compassion could protect even one child, then it was worth whatever storm was coming. Humanity stands firm. The news spread faster than fire in dry grass. By the time the sun rose again, the market was no longer just a place for trade. It had become a place of waiting, a place of watching. Every alien who passed through the gates carried the same question on their lips. Would the humans stand alone, or would they bend when Baron Kraith's shadow arrived? The cashier worked quietly as always, stacking bread, measuring grain, greeting customers. But behind his calm, he knew the storm was near. The mother stayed hidden with her child, too weak to move, yet her story had already spread and no one could silence it. By midday the officers returned, but this time they were not alone. Strangers walked with them, dressed in black armor without symbols. Their steps were too sharp, their eyes too cold. The crowd recognized them at once. Kraith's hunters. The marketplace fell silent. Even the children who usually laughed and ran between stalls stopped moving. The hunters stepped into the center, scanning the crowd with mechanical precision. One lifted a scanner, its red light sweeping over faces. Another rested his hand on the hilt of a blade. The lead hunter's voice was sharp and cutting. We know she is here. Bring us the woman and her child. The words cut through the silence like a blade. Some traders stepped back, others lowered their eyes. Fear pressed down on the market, heavy and suffocating. But before the officers could speak, a voice rose, steady and strong. It came from the cashier. She is under my care, he said. The words echoed in the stillness. The lead hunter turned his head slowly, his dark visor locking onto the human. You dare to claim her, the hunter hissed. You dare to shield property of Baron Kraith. She is not property, the human said firmly. She is a mother, and the child is hers. No one will take them. The hunters stepped closer, the officers shifting nervously at their side. It was clear the law enforcers did not want to be caught between humans and Kraith's men. The crowd began to stir. For the first time, other humans stepped forward one by one. A miner with soot still on his face, a trader with rough hands, a healer with tired eyes. Each of them moved quietly, but together, forming a line beside the cashier. We stand with him, said the miner. The words carried weight. More humans joined, until a wall of them faced the hunters. The market erupted with whispers. Are they mad? One alien gasped. They will be slaughtered. Another hissed, but the humans did not break their line. They stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the hunters. The hunters sneered. You think numbers will save you, the leader spat. You are reckless, always reckless. This is why your kind is feared. The cashier's voice cut through the words like a blade. No, we are feared because we do not abandon the weak. We are feared because we stand when others bow. The hunters raised their weapons, a flash of light glinting in the sun. The crowd gasped, but the humans did not move. Every face was steady, every gaze locked. It was not courage born of madness, it was courage born of unity. One act of defiance had become many. One man's kindness had become a shield of humanity. The officers hesitated, their hands shaking at their sides. They were supposed to enforce order, but this was not order. This was something greater. If they struck now, the market would never recover. If they let it pass, Craith would not forgive them. They were trapped, and everyone knew it. The lead hunter lowered his visor, his voice dripping with threat. "You have made enemies you cannot imagine, human," he hissed. "This will not end here." The cashier did not flinch, his voice steady. "Then let it begin here." The silence that followed was heavier than steel. The hunters turned sharply, signaling retreat. They would not fight here, not now, not against a wall of humans standing firm under the eyes of the galaxy. But as they left, their shadows lingered. Everyone knew they would return, and they would not come quietly. The crowd erupted in voices again, some in fear, some in awe. But one truth burned brighter than all the noise. The humans had stood together, and in standing they had changed everything. That night the mother wept quietly in her shelter, not from fear this time, but from hope. Her child stirred weakly, his hand clutching hers. She whispered into the dim air, "They stood for us. My son, they stood for us when no one else would." The words filled her chest like fire. For the first time in years, she believed survival was possible. The cashier stood outside under the cold stars, his shadow long across the street. He knew this was only the beginning. But in his heart, one truth echoed again and again: when humanity stands firm, no empire, no warlord, no fear can silence them. Echoes across the stars. The hunters did not return that night, but their absence did not bring peace. Instead, the market was filled with a new kind of silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of waiting. Waiting for the next step. Waiting for the storm to break. The human cashier stood at his stall as always, his hand steady, his eyes calm. But everyone could see the weight he carried. He had not just fed a mother and her child. He had fed an idea, and that idea had grown too, large to hide. By dawn, word of what happened spread beyond the city. Messengers carried the story across ports and stations. Dock workers repeated it in distant colonies, and within days, ships carried the tale across sectors. The humans stood against Craith's hunters, they whispered. They refused to give up the weak. And with every retelling, the story grew sharper, louder, more dangerous. In the council halls of distant worlds, leaders debated nervously. Some called the humans reckless, others called them inspiring. One elder shook his head and said, "This is why they are feared, not because of their fleets, not because of their weapons, but because they will not bow." The mother felt the change too. She sat in her small shelter, her child finally eating without trembling. She could still feel fear in her bones, but it no longer ruled her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the humans standing firm, a wall of courage that had faced the hunters and refused to break. She whispered to her son, "You will remember this. You will grow with this story in your heart." The hunters, meanwhile, reported back to Craith. Their message was filled with venom. Humans interfere. Humans resist. Humans protect the weak. Craith's rage shook his fortress, but even he knew something had changed. An enemy who fights with weapons can be broken, but an enemy who fights with compassion is harder to crush. Back in the market, life returned in small steps. Stalls opened, children played, voices rose again. But beneath it all, the story pulsed. Like a heartbeat, traders began to lower prices for the poor. Healers treated the weak without asking for full pay. And whenever someone asked why, the answer was simple. The humans did it first. The cashier never sought attention. He still worked behind his counter, still counted coins and carried baskets, but he was no longer just a man. He was a symbol, and symbols could not be ignored. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the market in firelight, the mother approached him. Her child walked beside her, weak but smiling for the first time in months. She bowed her head, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave us more than food," she whispered. "You gave us tomorrow." The human shook his head gently. "No," he said, his voice steady. You gave yourself tomorrow, I only refuse to let it be stolen. The mother's tears slipped down her face, but they were no longer only tears of sorrow, they were tears of hope. From a distance, alien traders watched this quiet exchange. One muttered, "This is why we cannot control them." Another replied, "This is why we cannot ignore them." Because the truth was clear, humanity had shown a strength beyond ships and steel. They had shown a strength that traveled faster than any fleet. The strength of compassion, and so the story spread even farther. Across ships, across stars, across councils and colonies, echoes of a single act of kindness rippled through the galaxy. Some feared it, some mocked it, some admired it, but none could forget it. At his stall, the human cashier closed his counter for the night. He looked up at the stars, his shadow long against the empty street. He whispered to himself words no one else could hear. One act of kindness can start a war, or a legend. Above him, the stars shimmered quietly, as if they too were listening, as if they too carried the echo, and somewhere beyond, in places yet unseen, that echo began to stir. A warning, a promise, a seed of something far greater. The galaxy would never be the same, because one human had refused to let a stranger walk away hungry.